This is your host of CivilNet, and we're honored today to be joined by Manuk Hergnyan, who is the managing partner of Granatus Ventures, Armenia's leading venture capital fund. Thank you, Mr. Hergnyan, for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Your specialty and your company focus as venture capital is actually, even though it's commonly known in business circles, most ordinary people don't understand how it really works and what it is. I think in order to enlighten the rest of our conversation, it'll be good if you just give an overview of what does a venture capital fund do, and specifically what does a venture capital fund in Armenia do?
Sure. Basically, venture capital is a special type of investment fund that accumulates resources from investors and invests into companies with a view to add value, grow the companies, and then sell its stake and make some profit. The special type of companies in this case are high-tech, high growth, but very high-risk companies, what we call startups. Startups are, as opposed to kind of SMEs, they are companies that have been formed recently. They haven't yet found their scalable business model, but they may become very large in a very short period of time. So their potential to grow is very high, and in that regard, they're also very risky. And because they're also based on technologies, there are a number of risks, not only market risk, but also technology risk. So, for example, the technology they're working on may not materialize. It should be, or the market may be not there yet, or the adoption may be lagging behind the offering. So multiple risks. So basically, it's a high risk, high return investment area.
I think one of the things that I wanted you to enlighten people about, because people who are not here really don't understand, is sort of this feeding frenzy type atmosphere here now in the tech sector. I mean, I hear numerous, almost daily reports of people taking each other's staff, tripling salaries, and every day you wake up, there's another startup that got $10 million in funding here, 20 million, 50 million. This was not the case a couple of years ago. We used to have singular names. Now there's names that I can't even keep track of. Can you give people sort of the zeitgeist of what's going on here, because I think most people don't understand it, especially abroad.
Sure. Maybe I would better provide some quick overview of kind of historical development of IT and tech industry in Armenia, so that people know the context. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, basically the high-tech industry almost completely collapsed in Armenia. And people, very high qualified professionals, started to leave the country or change their professions. And then those who went abroad started gradually to send some small contracts to their friends who stayed in Armenia, because the salaries were very low, but the professionals quite high quality. And then after that, some international organizations, companies started setting up their offices in Armenia. Started with a few microelectronics companies, and then specifically IT software development companies. And then the first phase of development of IT sector started in Armenia, basically setting up branches of multinationals, as well as local companies that were predominantly engaged in doing outsourcing work for international companies, as well as some custom software development for specific clients. Back in 2012-2013, a very weak trend of developing their own product and real productization started. This is when we spotted the opportunity and started our venture fund. At that time, probably there were 5 to 10 companies that would qualify to be called startups. But we already spotted the trend, and we, with some leap of faith, we bet on the potential of the Armenian IT industry. And since then, I think we've seen a tremendous growth in the startup culture. Probably we could identify about up to 1,000 companies that can qualify as startups currently in the country. And there are already some big names. So
can you actually give some of those names? Because I think it'll be interesting for people to know what we're really talking about. Like obviously some of these companies you've been involved with yourself.
Yes, for example, probably many people would know Pixar. It's one of the first startups actually in Armenia that also helped to incubate a few other companies by people leaving the company and starting their own businesses. Code Signal that recently raised also $50 million, which is one of our star performance in our current portfolio. Crisp, the noise cancellation company, SoloLearn, Service Titan, which is not a company that started in Armenia, but actually they set up their operations. So we have to note also a very unique feature of Armenian startup ecosystem, that there is intense links between Armenia and particularly the US ecosystem because of the diaspora connection. So many companies, many startups that founded by Armenian founders back in the US, they're setting up their operations in Armenia so that eventually they become kind of semi-Armenian companies as well. So back to the question on what's happening now in the ecosystem, we reached the point where one strata of startups reached the point where they are mature enough to attract sizable international capital, and that's why we're seeing so many interesting announcements about the next round of investment or next round of funding. These are basically funding by international venture capital, primarily US venture capital. The valuations are US equivalent valuations, they're not Armenian kind of valuations of the businesses. The markets are outside, they're serving global markets. And they are coming after also Armenian talent, the engineering talent, and that's why increasing the demand for engineers, and now there's mismatch between the demand and supply. So we have much more demand for talented engineers that we can supply.
I'm glad you asked that question, and that segues into we have, and all the people I've spoken to in your industry, they all, in fact, frankly, in almost every sector of the economy, but more acutely in yours, is the lack of engineering talent, the lack of, essentially lack of enough people to hire in all sectors, especially in yours. And this is a function of two things from what I see. Part of it is that the education system is not up to par in producing people that are, market ready as far as the jobs of today. That's part of it. And the other one is that, the demand is far greater than the country itself can supply. Almost everyone that I've spoken to, and some of this process has already started, is bringing in talent from abroad. I know companies that have hired from India, from Belarus, from Iran, where there's a lot of engineering or physics and other high sciences type talent. Is that the case? And is there a way out of meeting our demand needs that doesn't involve bringing in thousands of people from abroad, even though that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's going to have its own impacts on the society? How do you see us dealing with that issue? What's the long-term way of or is there no way out of essentially internationalizing the industry?
First of all, it's not a very bad thing, given that Armenia is becoming an attractive country for the talent to come and work on companies that are operating on international scale, can pay very high salaries. But of course that creates a lot of disproportions, and also that creates quite significant challenges for new startups, because those well-funded companies that can attract top talent they are kind of depriving this opportunity of the smaller companies. And then this can become what we can call a disease of maturity. When the ecosystem matures, there's some disproportions happening, and then at some point you can see that, okay, the growth is not accelerating anymore. So we have to somehow address this issue. First of all, of course, on a long term, it's investment into educational system to increase the supply. But that's not only about just equipping students with technical skills. It's about equipping them with the ability to have the discipline to do hard work, to learn math, because it's not only just the demand is higher not for just the simple tasks of coding, which is in some areas becoming a commodity. But much more higher skills that are required in math, data science, etc. So that needs really a different approach to education, where we have to focus on discipline, focus on how we make kids to be consistent in their approach and to tackle complex challenges. In terms of other opportunities, I think in a short-term perspective, I think it's, to some degree, it is okay to bring people from outside, because it also creates some diversity and people learn from each other. From the other side, I see Armenia to move. Armenia is facing a challenge to moving to the next phase of development, its tech ecosystem, where we can specialize in much more complex and sophisticated solutions, where you won't need like thousands of programmers, while you need a very talented data scientists or engineers or mathematicians or physicists. This is where our next challenge lies.
I'm glad you asked that. I was speaking to someone in your industry yesterday, and one of the things they said is to make that leap. In fact, what we need is essentially, for lack of a better comparison, a sort of a TUMO for the life sciences, for biotech and for engineering. Maybe for older, young people or older adults, to make that next leap. What do you see the need for that, and specifically things in the life sciences and engineering? Because it's not the one thing that we have lost in this country over the last 30 years is the hard sciences, and you need to get that back. Because if you're going to make that next leap, you have to have research facilities, serious ones, funded by people. Frankly, a good part of our scientific community now is over 70 years old. So what do you see? What do we need to do in the sciences? And is this a function of state investment? Is this a function of the industry investing in it? What do you see? What's the road out of that?
Yeah, that's a very complex issue, and let me start with the stating that our ecosystem, tech ecosystem, is currently facing the challenge to transition into a state where we are creating new tracks of startup development. What I mean, in Armenia, the conventional way of creating a tech startup has been some engineers employed by a big company or an international companies quitting their job and forming a team and starting a new company. We completely lack the track of creating startups based on the commercialization of science. So this is the next challenge for us. We, as a commercial organization, are committed to help create that track. I can explain how on an example of one of our recent investments. The mandate of our fund is to invest in companies that have some core value add operations in Armenia. We also invest in companies that originated outside of Armenia, but as a result of our investment, we bring them to Armenia. We have invested recently. We have invested in a company that is developing a solution in the area of personalized cancer treatment. The technology has been developed at Mount Sinai Medical Center in the US, licensed by a UK company. And by applying some AI and genomics, they are tackling one of the world's complex problems. So now we're trying to bring the data science operations of this company into Armenia. So the profile of a person to head this operation was someone with a background in bioinformatics and data science, genomics and oncology. So we couldn't find anyone in Armenia. We have been lucky to identify a professor from Leipzig University through help of our friends at the Institute of Molecular Biology and convince the professor to commit to come to Armenia and head these operations and also recruit and train the talent. And now we are in a recruiting phase. So by having nothing actually in Armenia in this space, we are engineering very sophisticated operations here. But if you had like an excellence center in the country in life sciences, we would have people trained in data science with a background in genomics and oncology, and we could achieve this in a much easier way. So I think there is a demand from the private sector. There is a push from the private sector to develop this area as well, but generally we need a much more heavy investment in infrastructure and science so that we also become a player in this field.
Thank you for the excellent answers. My last question: I've been hearing from different people that people expect that by the end of next year we're going to hit 4 to 5 legitimate unicorns of Armenian startups. And for people who don't know, unicorn is any company that has a valuation over $1 billion. Is that true? Are we likely to hit that, or is that aspirational?
I think that's quite feasible in the next few years to have unicorns founded by Armenians. But I think the next phase of development for Armenia would start when some of those companies have so-called liquidity events, or they exit, they do IPOs, or they're acquired by larger companies, and we have this group of founders with quite significant resources, and that start investing back into the ecosystem. The so-called Skype effect that happened in Estonia when the Skype was sold, and then the founders and many engineers that suddenly got quite wealthy, and they started investing back into the ecosystem. That may create an entirely new era for the Armenian ecosystem.
Well, first of all, thank you for joining us, and more importantly, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you for reminding me. Thank you.
This is your host of CivilNet, Eric Hacopian. Thank you for joining us.